Hey everybody, it's Steven from Asian Boss. The protests over George Floyd's death in the US are showing no signs of slowing down, and the Black Lives Matter movement has now gone global. Even in South Korea, which at times struggles with a global image of racism, a lot of Koreans took to the streets last weekend to voice their support for the Black Lives Matter movement. One person who feels very passionate about this issue is Sam Okyere, who we interviewed a while back and is currently the most famous black man in Korea. We're able to catch up with Sam to get his take on the whole Black Lives Matter movement. Let's get right to it. Oh man, Sam.
Oh man. People shouldn't be freaked out, you know? We're like, oh my gosh, they're doing a handshake.
Keep the social distance.
Yeah.
I think it's okay.
Oh, it's good, it's good.
It's been, what, 3 years since we sat down like this
Yes.
for an actual interview?
That video was very impactful, and I still get messages regarding the video. Like, people will write to me randomly and be like, hey, I know this video was posted 3 years ago. I just stumbled upon it. I loved what you talked about, you know, and how it helped them, or how it's trying to get them in a space where they want to challenge themselves and go to new environments and do things. So man, that video was, yeah, it did a lot of good.
What do you think is it about that video or about you that resonated with so many people, do you think?
As humans, we always have this thing inside of us that wants to face challenges, that wants to be in a new environment, but there's always that element of fear. Like, I don't know if I can do it. Is there anybody out there who's doing something like that? So for people to look at me and listen to my story of how this kid from Ghana all the way to Korea and do what I'm doing now, for them it's like that symbol of maybe hope.
If you were famous back then,
Right.
I think now you have been elevated to that super celebrity status where pretty much it'll be fair to say, like if you're out on the street, you'll be definitely way more famous than you were 3 years ago, right?
In a way, yes, right? Now everybody knows me, you know. Back then, I would say probably some young folks knew who I was, right? And they liked the idea of, you know, foreigners coming on TV and, you know, talking about where they're from. But now it's like a nationwide thingy. I could go to this village in Korea or this countryside in Korea and it was like, you know, it's like, yeah, you know what? For me, that means a lot for especially the older generation to open up and accept me and acknowledge me and say, hey, I like what you're doing. And you're the guy from Ghana, right? Just the fact that I even know about Ghana through what I do.
Yeah.
Every time I hear that, it's really inspiration, and it tells me I need to go even harder.
Yeah. So we can talk about like your experience in Korea because
Yeah.
that's your experience.
Right.
And then we can talk about your take on what's happening in America.
Yes.
But as far as Korea, would you say that your popularity or your recognition at this point has anything to do with the fact that people are nice to you now? How has people's treatment of you changed over the years? Because we briefly touched on this 3 years
Right.
ago when you said that, you know, people are not really nice to me, but now you are one of the biggest, the most well-recognized celebrity, legit mainstream celebrities that there are. So how do people treat you now?
I think a lot has changed in the 3 years. As you're aware, or if you're not, you know, I got my permanent residency in Korea, and that was a decision that I took just to dive a little bit deeper into the history of Korea. You know, what makes them this group of people? So I plunged myself into taking classes to learn about the Korean history, and I feel like doing that really changed a whole lot of things because they're looking at me like, okay, this person is a foreigner, but just the fact that he's taken out time to really learn about the history and say, hey, here's the thing. I understand where you guys are coming from. I see why you behave the way you behave. I'm not, you know, looking at it and saying this is bad, blah, blah, blah. I recognize the ignorance. And I see that in that ignorance, there is an opportunity to teach. But before I do that, I have to understand where you guys are coming from. Right. And I took that time and the effort to do that. And I feel like that really opened up a whole new spectrum of opportunities for me to interact with Koreans on a level that I've never done before. You know, because for Koreans to look at me and hear me sing the national anthem, that made people look at me different. And also it made them say, okay, maybe I should look into his country a little bit. Maybe I should look into his culture a little bit, see what's going on with them, see what kind of people they are, what their history is like. Especially, I have a lot of Koreans who write to me and say, hey, I know this is going on. I'm totally against it. I stand with you. I support you. Like, I'm getting a lot of people supporting me, and That would have never happened like a few years ago. People would be like, well, that's happening in the US, nobody cares about that or whatnot. But people
even about this incident.
Even about this particular incident, with George Floyd, I had a lot of people write to me and say, I support you. I think racism is bad. It has to be banned. It has to go away. And I feel like it has to be, both ways. I take time to study and teach there as well. Any questions they have, they can ask me and I can talk to them. And this is why dialogue is so important. People need to talk.
Absolutely.
What is it about me that makes you feel uncomfortable? What is it about me that makes you feel some type of way? Then we talk about it. And you realize that at the end of the day, fundamentally, essentially, we are all just humans.
Let's take a step back. How do you even go about getting a permanent residency in Korea?
Oh, good question. So if you want to get a permanent residency, you should have lived here for about 5 years. And the most important thing is that they have this Korea integration program. You have to learn basic Korean and about Korean history. I took the level 5, which is you're running through the Korean society from education to finance to religion to history. You're running through all these topics. And after you do that, you take an exam. You have an interview as well. So they'll ask you relevant questions about Korean history. They'll say, okay, well, how did Korea become, or go from a third world country to a first world country? Please explain the process. So these are things that you have to know. And once you pass that interview, you don't have to apply. And, a whole bunch of forms. You have to also state why you want to be a permanent resident.
Right.
You have to write it down. And they review all the documents from your education to your job, to things that you've done in society, like charity work and all those things. And when they review it and they think you're qualified, they give you the permanent residence. So I was lucky enough, to be able to become fed upon that status. After I did that, all the shows that went on to be able to talk about Korean history, even history that Koreans...
They don't know themselves.
Yeah, they don't know themselves. Like, how does he know that? So people were really blown away by that. And it really opened a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities for me.
These are very troubling times.
Right.
You know what's going on
Absolutely.
in the world right now. What do you make of the recent event about George Floyd's death?
I really couldn't bring myself to watch the entire video because I got very emotional.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that could have been my brother, that could have been my cousin, that could have been a family member, and that person is not there anymore. And that person has become, this subject of police brutality. For me, it really hit home.
You've been to the States.
I've been to the States a couple of times, and I got stopped by the cops in America one time. I remember when I got stopped, my heart was literally racing out of my chest. I was so scared.
What happened?
I was on a highway, and Korea has a lot of speed cameras. America does not. So you have a lot of cops just hiding in the dark. And once you exceed the speed limit, there's a little chase, but they don't turn the sirens on. They follow you closely for a little bit, and then they turn the sirens on and they ask you to, park, and they want to check your driver's license and the registration of the car and whatnot. But for me, just the fact that I had a police on my trail, that really sparked a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's gonna happen. But I know that I have to keep calm. I have to keep my hands on the steering wheel. I don't have to try to reach for anything or do anything, unusual. So even that experience was traumatic enough for me. And I could just imagine, what the late George Floyd was going through in those very last moments, asking that I cannot breathe, please can you take your knee off my neck? And this cop is like, still doing it, persistent till the end, and he loses his life. So one side of me was like, oh my gosh, there goes another black victim of police brutality. But it's different this time because we have social media. We have people who are filming these events. And I'm asking myself, if this thing was not filmed, what would have been the outcome? But now we have video evidence. So if you say it didn't happen, there's video circulating around the web that it did. So it's enough evidence for people to come out and say, well, we want a real change now, because we've had issues in the past where, Black lives have been lost to police brutality, and, there's never been real justice served. The cases have been swept under the carpet as time went on, but you can only do that to a group of people for so long. It really hit a lot of things home, to be honest. I'm moving out in the process of moving, and my friend and I were saying, I'm moving my furniture from my house to a friend's house. Now, would it have been safe if I did this in the States? I'd say 12 a.m. You know, in Korea, it's safe to do that. You know, we can take the TV, him and I will carry the TV and take it. But if I was in America, would we have been able to do that? Somebody would probably call the cops and said, hey, I see two black men with a TV.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I guess this is something that someone like me who's not black can never understand.
Right.
So today I'm mainly here to listen.
Right.
To listen to a different point of view. From your perspective, who's not necessarily American, why does this happen in the first place?
Years and years of systematic oppression, right? Because here's the thing, if you have oppressed people for over 400 years, you know, you don't expect things to just quickly go back to normal, you know, and you've demeaned the skin color of the person. You know, you haven't given the person, you know, equal opportunities to be able to thrive in the society. And, you know, there've been certain policies that have not necessarily benefited those kind of people. So it always sets them aback. You know, whilst other societies are progressing, there's always that stagnation. And also that mentality of color, right? If you're darker tone, you know, this like, oh my gosh, you know, they think, well, maybe you're poor, you know, you're probably dirty, you know, all these like misconceptions about the color of a person, you know, and it's like that is deeply rooted because you're thinking, okay, the paler your skin is, you know, that means maybe, you know, better, right? You know, because you advertise things to make people look paler. And this is not just the Korean problem, even in Ghana. Like I grew up where if your skin was lighter, people liked that.
Really?
Yeah, of course, man. We had a problem with bleaching because people wanted to get lighter. Like this is a problem that's worldwide, colorism, right? The lighter your skin is, people think you're better. Like I grew up in that kind of society. So it was not something that was new to me, but it's not right. If you're lighter shade, it doesn't make you any better. We're equal. During my college days, I wanted to teach at an English institute and you know, I'll go online, I'll find the institution's number, I'll call, and we have a phone interview. And at the end of the interview, they'll ask me if I'm black or white.
That's one of the questions.
Yes, that's like the utmost question. You know, like the most important question they ask you: are you white or black? And when I say black, they be like, oh, we're sorry, but we don't hire blacks. That was really crazy to me. And one incident I remember, you know, they couldn't see my face. They didn't know who I was. They'd only heard me speak. They invited me to the institute. I met with the guy, we talked and everything. And at the end of the interview, he's like, yo, let's talk casually. And we start talking, he's like, look, the truth is you're qualified for the job, but my manager does not want you because she's scared that because you're black, it might scare a lot of students away from coming to the Hagwon. They're gonna shy away from coming to the Hagwon. And that was so crazy to me.
That's crazy.
I was like, I was in total shock. I could not believe it. I was disgusted.
When was this?
Probably, I think 2012, 13-ish.
So in some ways, it is kind of a little while ago, but then again,
Yeah.
you would think that it's still like 2000.
Exactly, yeah, you know, in 2013, 2014. I know personally teachers, you know, they have like master's degrees in education and whatnot. They teach in a Korean Hagwons, and the parents would tell the operators like, hey, I'm sorry, but I don't want a black teacher teaching my kid. You know, from the managers, it's a business, right? They need to make money. So they'll say, hey, unfortunately, we cannot hire you. You know, not that you're not qualified, but the parents don't want that. So I ask myself, when these kids come to school, they don't really care. They just, you know, want to play around. But the parents put that in their heads, like don't play with the black kid. Or when they see a black kid, you know, they try to see if his skin color is gonna rub off.
Are you just making this up?
No, I kid you not, man. I have people that I've spoken to, I have kids that I've spoken to, and they tell me when I go to school, the kids try to touch my skin, they try to lick my skin. You know, they ask me if I'm starving.
What?
Yeah.
And you think that most of this comes from the parents?
I think so. I think the parents, you know, they have an important role to play in terms of educating the kids. That, for example, if you go to an international school or even some local schools, you're going to have foreigners there, and they just foreigners buy the passports, but they're human just like you. You know, when you say something hurtful to them, they're going to feel the pain. They might cry, they feel happy just like you. These are just fundamental things that are similar in human beings that I feel like every parent has, that responsibility to instill in their children. And I don't really find that here. It's not just in Korea, even in Ghana. Like I have friends who are half Ghanaian and half Korean, and the kids there will say really hateful things to them. Like, your dad came all the way from Korea to come like sleep with your mom. Like, where are you Ghanaian? Are you Korean? What are you? You're half. Like, they said really hurtful things to her. And when she told me that, I was like, wow, this is not just an issue in Korea.
It's a human being,
it's
basically.
It's a human being issue wherever you go. When we meet people who don't look like us, our first instinct is we're trying to see what's different. And we use that difference to, form some sort of prejudice against them.
That type of, you could say, prejudice
Right.
shouldn't literally translate into some sort of physical violence.
Right, exactly.
Right? I would like to think that something like that doesn't really happen in Korea. Would I be correct in saying that?
Personally, I haven't heard people, talk about being discriminated against so much that, it got very physical. I'm sure there might be cases, but I personally, I really haven't heard that. And, sometimes I feel like moreover just physical, just the words that people spew out of their mouths, the looks people give you, just not wanting to sit next to you, the reactions of people. I feel like these things sometimes they cut even more.
Yeah.
Because when you want to fight, somebody can fight back, right? But when you say something to demoralize them or to kill their spirit, like, you've pretty much done the entire job. Like, people would just walk up to me and say really bad stuff to me. Like, really, they'll swear at me for no reason whatsoever. I'm just gonna be walking and, they'll just pass by and say something bad to you. One time, this was like, I think a year or two ago, I was driving and this guy just cut in my lane. He didn't show his blinker or anything. So I drove and I said, hey, you can't do that. And this guy starts going all racist at me. And I was like, I was so furious. And the thing is that he had his wife in the car and his two daughters at the back. And his wife kept telling him, don't say that, don't do that. But he was so angry and whatnot. So
what did you say to that guy?
Of course I was really mad, but he was driving. There was really nothing I could say to him, But I've had a lot of instances where I've wanted to retaliate forcefully, but I realized that if I do that, it will still perpetuate that kind of thinking. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I went to this area and I was trying to park. And I had a mask on so the guy couldn't see who I was. And he's like, no parking, blah, 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 blah. But I just seen some Koreans parking. So I took off my mask and I said, why aren't you gonna let me park? I'm gonna pay you the same currency. You're here, you're working for money. So why wouldn't you take the money and let me park? And he had no response to me. He had no reply. Absolutely nothing. He's like, okay, guy on TV, everything just changed. Demeanor changed.
But that's what I'm saying.
Way of talking just changed. And
it's almost like you have this special privilege now that the only reason they might even be open to listening to you because they know who you are.
Right.
Right.
But here's the thing. Even before he recognized who I was, when I asked him, why wouldn't you let me park here? I spoke to him in Korean, right? Because there's always that issue of a language barrier. True. But once you break that barrier, you can have a conversation. Why wouldn't you let me park here? I'm going to pay you. What's the problem? They can't say anything.
But then again, you probably have a lot of foreigner friends.
Yes.
In Korea.
Yeah.
What kind of racism or discrimination do they face from what you hear? And can you relate to that?
The truth is that over the racism that they face, I actually hear, thank you, bro. Thank you, man. Because of you, my boss is not racist to me at work. Yeah. I actually hear that more than the racism experience. A few, probably like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I would have heard that. Hey, bro, I'm working with some Koreans, so I'm working here and I feel discriminated against and whatnot. But now the story is slowly changing. It's gone from, oh my gosh, I hate my boss, they're always discriminating against me, to thank you so much for what you've done. Like,
it's like you set the tone. Almost.
You set the tone, especially for people, from Africa and more specifically Ghanaians. I have people call me and say, hey, I was going for an interview. They asked where I'm from. I said Ghana and I got the job. Or people, also saying because of what you're doing, we are taking it upon ourselves to not succumb to discrimination, to stand up for ourselves and say, you cannot say those things to me just because of my skin color. You cannot say that. It's unacceptable. And I'm going to stand up for myself. Like, I see these things now, and people are starting to have this thing of, you know, I have to respect myself. I have to hold myself in high esteem, you know, despite where I'm coming from, despite what I look like, despite my skin color. I am important as a person, and what I have to contribute to society is super important as well. So I shouldn't let anybody look down on me. So sort of like people are getting more empowered.
Let's say people are feeling more empowered,
Yeah.
and they're more willing to speak up. Where do you think Korean society is at the moment in terms of embracing all those type of things? Because people can either be like super defensive, like,
Right.
"Oh, we're not that bad.
Right.
What are you talking about?" You know, or they're like, "Oh, really? Let's hear what you have to say." Like, where do you think Korean society is at the moment?
I think the process has been very gradual because obviously there's so many internal issues, you know, and so many local issues, even for the locals, the natives who are here. So it's a thing of, well, we have a lot of things to deal with. We can't really bring this on, right? But also you can't ignore the fact that we have over 2 million foreigners living in Korea. It's all about not having that, you know, narrow thinking that, oh my gosh, okay, the only information I can find about foreigners or I can find about the world is on a platform that's Korean. There are bigger platforms than that. So if you want to connect yourself to the world, you cannot do that by separating yourself. You have to step out of that, oh, it's just us mentality to, well, the whole world is connected now. Everything that is happening in the world is in turn going to affect us in a way because it will affect the economy, and that will trickle down into people's pockets and people's daily livelihoods. So you have to be actively engaged in what's going on in the world, as opposed to, oh, I didn't know that was happening. And I see that changing now. A lot of young Koreans, like especially with the situation that's happening in America, now people are aware of it.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised that
Right.
this whole Black Lives Matter
Yes.
movement, as well as George Floyd, it was trending on Korean social media as well.
Absolutely, you know, and back in the day, of course, there have been so many incidents that some Koreans have not known about. And also, that is one thing I try to do with my platform is that every time I go on TV, I try to talk about that and say, hey, this is happening to people, you know, my people, and it is not right. And we have to talk against it because if that happened to a Korean, I would stand up and say, this is not right. You can't treat that person like that. Fundamentally, you cannot treat a person like that. So these are things that we need to look into. And slowly, some radio stations and some TV stations are talking about it. Back in the day, it would be banned. Like, don't say that on air.
Really?
We don't want our listeners knowing that because it's uncomfortable. But these are social issues that need to be addressed. So in terms of using platforms like television, like radio, I feel like there's slowly being that change where people are a bit more aware and interested in social issues and not just want to look at it from afar, but in a way want to contribute and also want to be a part of the solution, you know, moving forward.
I guess that's kind of encouraging to hear.
Right.
But then again, there's the whole perception issue. So for example, we just did a video where we interviewed a bunch of Korean people on the streets
Yeah.
just to get their reaction on the whole George Floyd incident and the protest that's going on in the States. And everybody's like, oh, what's the point of talking to Koreans? They're actually more racist.
Right.
So there's like that perception that somehow Korean people are racist, at least from the Western perspective. So why do you think that exists?
This is where Korea tries to use soft power. And in soft power, I mean things like K-pop, right? You have BTS doing, you know, absolutely phenomenal, like over the whole world. You have things like K-dramas. You have things like, you know, the music. People love that. And when you sell that to them, they get excited and they come here. And if it doesn't balance out here, people get very disappointed because they're like, oh, you're selling us all this image and we come here and it's not like that. So I feel like if you are going to do something like that, it is important that locally you do maybe like educate people and say, well, we know that this is eventually going to bring people to Korea. So we have to put ourselves in a position where we can actually contain these people. We can actually embrace these people, embrace different cultures, embrace different people, and just accept them and help them into our society.
That's actually a really good point because people's expectations are right here. And then
Exactly.
when they come to Korea,
Yeah.
it's like, no, this
Because
is
when
not.
you're selling yourself, you want to put your best foot forward. You don't talk about the negative things about you. Everything has to be positive, right? So people are sold this whole idea of, you know, the K world. Oh my gosh, it's this, it's that, it's that. And then you come here and it's not. So you get very disappointed. And when you get disappointed, you start looking at something that you loved before. So this is all fake. This is not real. So it's really, really important. It's really, really imperative that the government puts measures in place to help a lot of locals accommodate foreigners. Like, for example, the taxi drivers, right? I personally think that if you have a lot of foreigners coming in, it's basic etiquette. Even if you can't speak English, just relate to the person as a human being. Just nice. Hey, welcome to, Korea. Where are you going? These are things that leave long-lasting impressions on people. They come and say, wow, it's not perfect, but it's not as worse as I thought it was. So if you're going to go international, you have to prepare locally as well.
In the past, you talked about the taxi drivers as
Yes.
well. Have they gotten better in the last 3 years in terms of their service?
I can't tell. I mean, people still don't pick me up sometimes. I mean, it doesn't help now with the mask and everything, right? Once they pick you up and you have a conversation with them, it changes everything. So I always say, give the person an opportunity. Pick them up. Talk to them. You never know where the person is from. Like, I've had people who have picked me up and I found out they worked in like certain parts of Africa before. The stories are mind-blowing. I say, if you hadn't picked me up, we wouldn't have been able to make acquaintances and probably spoke about this. And me learning about your background and your story and me sharing my story with you, like this would have been a missed opportunity, So it's still there, but I feel like a lot of things still really need to be put in place. And now, the government introduced something where somebody's racist to you, a taxi driver, you can actually take a shot off the license plate and report it and say this person, so-and-so was racist to me. So I feel like they need to do more.
I think the issue, though, is that these people that does say things like that to you that are offensive, their voices somehow get exaggerated.
Right.
Especially in social media. It's almost like, negativity.
Exactly
it attracts
of course,
more negativity, right?
Yes.
And people just grab onto that.
Right.
The silent majority and loud
Of course,
minorities,
yeah.
right?
People gravitate towards something that's more negative, right? Because if you do positive things, it's like, yeah, okay, that's good. But if something's negative, oh my gosh, what happened? Oh my gosh, it's crazy. It's a human thing. It's a human thing. But I feel like we should not totally disregard that, but we should also focus more on the positives too. Because sometimes when you overly focus on the negative, it can be very draining. So you take cues from the negative and say, how can we turn this negative into a positive? I mean, there are certain times that I go on TV and I'm like, I can't believe this is still happening. But also in my head, I'm thinking, everything is not going to be solved overnight. All I can do is just sort of create a blueprint or leave my mark. I cannot change everything. And I cannot expect everything to change instantly, because how people perceive you is something that has, like a whole bunch of years have passed for people to create that kind of idea about you. And it's going to take a while for that idea to change, for people to unthink that. So even though I get angry, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. I say, it is still the reason why you have to go even harder, so that the future generation, things will be much better.
It's good to have that big picture.
The big picture, right? If you totally dwell in that, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing it, I'm tired, I'm not going to do it again. This is why I need to empower people like me to come along, because by myself, I can't do everything. Like, I don't have all the answers. There are people that are probably more experienced, who are probably more knowledgeable, and I want these people to come on board as well. It's important that people come together. So when I see foreigners doing stuff in Korea, I encourage them. When I see Black people doing stuff, I'm like, yes, you can do it. Any help that I can give to you from my end, I'm going to do it, because together we can probably reach more masses. We can do better and bigger things than I'll be able to do by myself.
What would be like your impression of the Korean police force?
I've personally, I haven't had any bad encounters, man. Like, I say to myself, I'm lucky to be in a place where, like sometimes the police would just stop and come and say hi. And even before I was famous, or before I did TV, even in the neighborhoods, I didn't feel, oh my gosh, these guys are trying to like come at me or look at me funny or whatnot. Like, when I say hi, they wave back. They were nice to me. I haven't really had any problems. And a lot of my foreign friends have attested to this, about the fact that, the police here, very nice compared to, other parts of the world.
So you've never gotten in trouble with them?
Not
like,
at all.
Whenever there's like something that's going on with another Korean person, they come to sort the situation out?
I've had people complain about the fact that, you know, they'll get in an argument with a Korean and it was probably the Korean's fault, but the police would come and favor the Korean. I've heard so many stories like that. And sometimes I've been there and I've had to talk to the police and say, I think you should not look at where the person is coming from or the skin color, just listen to the story and see who is making more sense and who is more right and judge that way.
Just to think how big your platform is that you actually get to lecture the police force.
I do, man. And here's the thing, just based on the person that I am, even if I didn't have the platform, as long as I could speak the language, I would have spoken to them. Because it's not a crime to talk to them, especially since I'm not being rude, you know, I'm not being offensive, just having a simple, normal conversation. I say, what is the problem, officer? Have you listened to both sides?
You know, the impression I get is that the police force in Korea, they're almost like a bit of a pushover. that people actually blatantly disrespects them, and it's almost like they have no authority. That's my personal impression. I could be wrong, but I mean, you talk about how contrasting it is to have Korean police, and then there's like the whole police thing in America. When you go to America, what's the difference you noticed?
When I go to America, especially if police is involved, I'm always on edge. Like, I'm always scared, you know, even if I haven't done anything wrong. And it's because of so many things that have happened. You know, I've seen videos where they'll stop a black person driving a car and say, well, we've never seen this kind of car in this neighborhood. Or, you know, how could you afford that car? Like, you know, for like sometimes the reasons don't make no sense. Like, they'll just stop you. And when you see those kind of situations and those kind of incidents for too long, you know, it just builds this kind of fear in you. Like, okay, if this person is from here and is being treated like that, how much more me, and I'm not even from here. So whatever I do, I should not get on the bad side of the police. Whatever I do, I shouldn't do anything that is gonna involve the police. Like, that is my mentality when I travel outside. I feel like sometimes because of the police brutality, the bad cops give the good cops a bad name.
True, that's absolutely true. I'm sure there are plenty of good cops.
There are plenty of good cops out there, and I'm sure they're probably like, oh my gosh, these bad nuts are really giving us a bad name. Because the cop that I had an experience with, he was a very nice guy. You know, I give him my Korean driver's license. I said, hey, I live in Korea, I'm visiting, and he's like, I need to run a few things with the card. I said, okay, came back, and he said, hey, I'm not gonna give you any ticket, just be careful. I know it's like probably like your first time driving in America and whatnot, so somebody will not be as nice as me and probably give you a ticket and whatnot, so just be careful. So it turned out to be, a more pleasant experience. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was going all crazy. You know, so, but I probably call it a lucky experience, right? Because not every cop is gonna be like that. But there are also good cops out there who don't wanna like strangle you and forcefully drag you and try to put their knees on your neck, or like, you know, all these crazy things that they do and eventually lead to a loss of life. So, but in Korea, generally the atmosphere is safe. It's really safe here. Like, it's so safe, you get used to it and you get in trouble when you go elsewhere because of how safe it is. And sometimes we joke like, it's so safe the police don't really have a lot of work to do.
They have no job.
Yeah, they have no job. They probably go try and stop a protest, or, you know, somebody's doing something bad and have to go and grab the person. But you don't see them going all crazy in the neighborhood and try to catch like criminals and burglars and stuff like that, because you don't really see that here. It's more of a safer environment, I think.
And also, what do you say to those people who, despite your background as a black person, you really advocate for the Black Lives Matter, but people say, oh, you're not even American. Like, what do you care, right? What do you say to those people?
Well, it says Black Lives Matter, right? It didn't say American or it didn't say Asian. It's just Black Lives Matter. And I feel like as a black person, having gone through some sort of racism and some sort of discrimination, in a way I can relate, you know? And so nobody can say, you're not American, you can't. I'm like, no, I don't have to be American to be able to support a life. You know, if Asians, it came out and say Asian Lives Matter, I'm gonna support that. I don't have to be Asian to support that, because the Black Lives Matter is not a thing where only black people are involved. If you've looked at the protests, there's so many people from different races who just want justice, who just want discrimination to be gone. You know, like they're helping with that. So you don't necessarily have to be of a specific race, of a specific nationality to say I want to join a cause for something that will stop racism, in the future, or something that will make sure that people who do bad things are judged right and accordingly. So when I hear something like that, I don't really pay them any mind. I'm like, bro, if you're human, you know what happened is wrong. And not just with George Floyd, we've recently with Ahmaud, right? The guy that was jogging and got gunned, like, some of these things. No matter your race, if you're not racist, you're of sound mind, and you see that, you're like, shoot, that is so crazy. That is inhumane. That should not happen. So whoever who did this has to pay. It's as simple as that. So when people see that and don't think there's anything wrong with it, then those people are the problem. Those people are the guys that we need to say, hey, you don't have to do that. That's wrong. You have to join the cause for what is right. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be confined to a specific skin color to, protest for what is right, or to protest for equal, no discrimination and looking at people equally and whatnot,
Even let's say this coronavirus thing, right? Before this George Floyd incident, there were a lot of reported cases of like Asians getting targeted and assaulted because of coronavirus. It's almost like it's in human nature.
Of course it is.
To just look for an excuse to target them, right? Because it's all Chinese fault.
Exactly.
For example.
Right. You want to put all of them in like one box and say all of them are doing it. You don't say, okay, it's so and so and so. You want to say, oh, all Chinese people, or all Asians, or all blacks, or all Latinos, or like people just like to collectively judge. And it's not just here. It's like I said, it's everywhere. Like it's everywhere you go. And it's just in our DNA as humans, because when you look at what has transpired over history, humans did that. No aliens came and did that for us. No robots came and like it's something that we as humans we've done and we've caused. So can we change that? Absolutely yes. If we want to, though.
You're doing all these great things in Korea. You're being inspirational. You try to talk to people. You are being a model minority, and suddenly some shit happens, and some like another, let's say, black guy from different parts of the world, he makes a national headline for the wrong reason. Like he did something. Suddenly that just completely undo.
Yes, exactly.
They just undo everything that you've worked for. Do you see that? Do you see that happening?
It's happened a couple of times. Like,
really?
Yeah. Like,
what was the incident?
I think this guy, he under the influence of alcohol, he drove and I think he hit a couple of cars, and they made a lot of noise about that issue, and like, oh, he's black and he's African.
Of course, that's the first thing they go to.
And they kept pounding on that. They kept pounding on that. They kept pounding on it. I'm like, why are they not focusing on the individual? And it was very tiring because, like you said, it almost like everything that you've been trying to work so hard for is like always like it's being brought back down, right? Like almost to ground zero, where you have to like, start up again and be like, oh no, it's not like that. It's just one bad nut. It's not the whole group. Oh, it's not. And like, well, recently, so and so, and even for in Korea, foreigners. The word foreigners. Everybody's under that umbrella.
That's true.
So when something happens and it involves foreigners, it's everybody.
Yeah.
It's not just one person. It's not just one race. We had a string of holidays, about a couple of days, and I think this one guy, this Korean guy from not in Seoul, but from close to Seoul, he came out partying and he was unaware that he had the virus, and it spread in Itaewon, and Itaewon is a place that habitates a lot of foreigners, right? So once the news broke out that it was infected, a lot of places were not admitting foreigners. Like I think a restaurant said, we don't accept any foreigners here. And it's like, my foreign friends were very angry. They said, well, this guy was Korean. He was not a foreigner.
But just because he did that in
Itaewon,
which is like the area of Seoul,
where it's like a lot of foreigners. It's like all foreigners.
Yeah, but you are based in Itaewon right now,
yes.
And how have you seen the businesses getting impacted because of that?
It's been absurd.
It's crazy, right?
I've gone around Itaewon, and this is the first time I've seen Itaewon as a ghost town. Dead. Stores are empty. Like it's so crazy. The impact is tremendous, in a bad way. All the restaurants are dead. It's so crazy. But these are people who, depend on the businesses for their livelihoods and whatnot. And just because of one incident and, wrong stigmatization, businesses are dead. So I feel like, they really have to do a better job.
Because of your celebrity status, how careful do you have to be with your personal conduct just because everything you do will be under microscope right now?
Like Kanye said, to whom much is given, much is tested. And when you have some sort of platform, when you have some sort of power, you're a leader, it comes with a lot of things. It comes with a lot of do's and don'ts. You like automatically get into this position where you represent a group of people, and if you do something bad, people are not going to look at you like, oh, Sam did something bad. They're going to be like, oh, black people did something bad, Ghanaians did something bad, Africans did something bad. Like, it hurts the whole group of people. If I go for events in clubs, I have to stay in a very specific area, and I don't really take photos with females.
Why is that?
Because you have to be very careful. For example, if somebody came out and said, well, I was with so and so and he did this to me, like anything that happens, whether it's sexual assault or whether, somebody bad was there, you might not have been with the person, but just the fact that you were in the same area and you're in the picture with the person, that's enough evidence for people to say, well, at least you were there and you were captured in that environment. It automatically implicates you. And the industry is so cutthroat that it leaves almost no room for error. Once you do a bad thingy, like basically that's it. You are canceled, as they say, So you definitely have to be careful.
Do you think that Korea needs a lot more work to do in terms of getting rid of racism, or do you think it's kind of progressing nicely?
I think there's still a lot more to do. Even when I look at foreigners living here, in terms of policies that will help the quality of life, it's lacking. Because, the foreigners living here play a very important role. If there are more foreigners who live here and are comfortable with the life and enjoy it, it tells other foreigners that this place is worth living. But if people are sharing very bad experiences and saying...
That's how Korea gets the perception that it's racist.
Exactly. People are saying, bro, don't go to Korea. They're going to be racist. They're going to blah, blah, blah. It's word of mouth and it spreads. If you're going to preach globalization, if you're going to preach Korea to the world, when Korea goes to the world comes to Korea. Just be ready for that.
What can Korea do better?
The government plays a very important role, in how people view foreigners and, how people look at the concept of discrimination. And one thing I found that is non-existent here is like anti-discrimination laws. They do not exist whatsoever. So people can discriminate and just go.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That does not exist here. So we can just discriminate and just go scot-free. So they can be treated anyhow. And it's like, hey, what are you going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. You have no voice. You just have to accept those conditions and live with them. And it pretty much breeds a room for people to just do whatever and get away with it. But if people, in a way, are penalized for that, they will know, okay, I should not do this next time. I should not discriminate against this person. I shouldn't do this. So there has to be some sort of laws in place you need some checks and balances, right? So you need people, when there's a law, people will be like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't do that.
I think people will take what you say very seriously because you speak from experience. You're the guy who overcame all these odds to make it and become a mega star in Korea. And so I think people will be very inspired by what you say.
Absolutely, man. We definitely have to do a lot of learning, about like different cultures, and also just respect for humans in general. Just respect people. Like, I don't see why you just want to disrespect somebody you don't know. It makes no sense to me. Just respect the person. It'll make the world a way lot better. Like, it'll make it a much better place.
So I guess lastly, anything you want to say to your fellow African Americans that are suffering at the moment in the States?
I just want to tell them that, black people all over the world are really in support. We're not there physically, but we feel it emotionally and spiritually because we're connected like that. And we support them, we pray for them, and we, are going to do everything we can within our means, wherever we are in the world, to try and support.
And raise awareness.
Exactly, and raise awareness. Together we can actually rise up and do something, but if you're divided, there's nothing that you can do. So this is actually a unique opportunity for all of us to come together and just fight for a common cause, right? Fight against racism, fight for equality, and fight for justice. And also, I just want to say a big thank you to people from all over the world, different races have come together and have come to understand that this is a human problem. And as humans, we need to combine, we need to come together to fight it. Even Korea, especially being in Korea, all the Koreans who have expressed support. There are a lot of celebrities who have put this on their platforms.
Yeah.
And this will never happen back in the day. Like, people want to protect their image, right? But they understand that this is not right. Shout outs to Jay Park, man. I really appreciate Jay Park a lot. You know, he, being an Asian growing up in America, he understands to an extent, you know, how it feels to be different. People look at you different and treat you differently and whatnot. So, you know, he's been at the forefront. Like, he's really, really trying to add his voice and use his influence to, you know, direct his followers to see what's right and whatnot. So it's been great, man. It's been great. It's been great. And I feel like if we keep this momentum, we can definitely bring about a needed change.
I suppose I feel very fortunate that we have this platform,
Right,
to
absolutely.
be able to give you this voice as well.
Asian boss, man. Yeah, it's I every time I go through the videos and I watch some of the interviews as well, they really inspire me. You know, they really inspire
thanks, man.
me. And
Appreciate it.
you guys are doing a great job, man. To be able to give people platforms to talk about social issues, to talk about personal experiences, and in the hope that these things will inspire people,
Absolutely.
will encourage people to challenge themselves, to challenge the status quo, and to basically fight for a much better world. I think this is probably one of the greatest gifts that you can give to anybody. So you guys are doing a splendid job, man. Thank you for that. Appreciate it, man.
Appreciate your time, bro.
No, thank you very much, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, bro.